Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar this afternoon. Just a couple housekeeping items. We have everybody muted. It just cuts down on the background noise, so it's not a disruption. But if you have questions as we go through this information over the next 20-25 minutes, if you want to post those questions in the question box off to the right, then when we wrap up, I'd be happy to scroll through those and answer any questions that we have. So what I want to do is go ahead and get started. What we're really looking at today is, should we be screening our existing employees? And you know what most people do, or let me even back up and give you a little on my background. You know, I'm Mike McCarty. I'm the CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions. I was a violent crime detective with the Metropolitan Police Department in Nashville, Tennessee, where I helped start one of the first community-based or police-based domestic violence programs in the United States. And I'm also co-founder of another company called eReference Check, which is a automated software platform for reference checking. It uses competency-based surveys, and we have a webinar for that coming up on June 27th at 2 o'clock if you would like to learn more about eReference Check as a software platform that can handle all your reference checks automated so that it reduces your time, cost, and labor in tracking down reference information. So why are we here? Well, we all have employees that A, have never had a background check. Maybe they predated you know, kind of the normal standard of conducting a pre-employment background check. Background screening industry is still pretty young and infant, or they've only had a limited background check, you know, used a statewide system or repository, so they've never really had a really complete background check, or they've not had a background check in more than 5 years. And we know that the background screening is a process that once we run that background screening report, it is basically, you know, outdated or stale information. You can get a background check report back today, and they can commit a crime going home tonight or in the morning, and it's not going to show. So background screening is not a one-and-done process. It must be an ongoing process. So really need to look at the policies of your organization and look at, you know, what makes sense for us, but we realize that we need to be doing background screening on an ongoing basis. There really is no case law that stipulates it needs to be every 2 years, 3 years. You know, so we see our clients doing it anywhere from every 3 to 5 years for those that are doing ongoing screening. And 5 years is kind of a benchmark that we see a lot of organizations use, and I think they follow the lead of a lot of law enforcement agencies that tend to rescreen their workforce every 5 years. So recent examples of the importance of ongoing background checks. Well, we've seen the debacle that's been going on at Penn State for quite some time. You know, the incidents that happened at Syracuse, you know, about a year and a half ago. We had a case, you know, within the last year where an employee of one of our clients was discovered after one of our clients accidentally hit a rescreen button when reviewing a report, and it ordered a recheck, and we called up the client because our policy is if it's a serious felony that we also follow up with a phone call, and our client was a little dumbfounded because they didn't mean to order the background check, but in fact it showed that that employee had a pending felony arrest. And their policy was that you have to disclose immediately when you have any kind of court action, and this had been pending for a little while. We've seen, you know, teacher's aide sexual molestation case, you know, from, you know, 19 years ago. So when this particular person was hired, it kind of predated background screening, so it had actually been employed for nearly 19 years with a, you know, child molestation, you know, conviction. And then another one recently where a teacher was accused of rape and had a felony conviction while employed, but the school did not know about it because they weren't conducting ongoing background checks. So if we look at some of the legal issues, workplace violence, there's, roughly 572,000 non-fatal violent crimes, rape, robbery, assault in 2009, which was a 35% decline, during 2002 to 2009. And I would say probably post 9/11, those first few years, we just had a hypersensitive or a heightened sense of awareness about safety and security issues. And so in that time period, that heightened sense of awareness and proliferation of background screening probably led to, a decline in some of these workplace issues. We have tighter security policies and procedures, and just a comprehensive background screening program. And I keep that in light of a lot of the laws we're seeing. Changes, coming from EEOC, even states like Indiana have passed a law that takes effect, Monday or July 1st, which would restrict the reporting of non-convictions. So we've seen a pendulum shift here in the last few years where there's a grave concern that, ex-offenders are becoming unemployable. And because of that, it's contributing to high rates of recidivism, though research shows over the last 20 or 25 years that recidivism rates for offenders in the United States has held pretty consistent or constant. But, we've seen these, pendulum shift to safety and security, and now the pendulum has really shifted back to the other side, and it'd be interesting to see how these numbers play out over the next many years as we've seen that pendulum shift the other direction. So when we talk about due diligence, this ongoing process of documenting, our due diligence on existing employee as well. And what due diligence is, it's basically the attention and care made by a prudent or reasonable person to avoid harm to another person or their property. So, what kind of precautions are you taking as an employer to ensure that your employees are not, what reasonable precautions are you taking to help, minimize the risk that one of your employees would harm another person or their property? And so background screening on an ongoing basis provides, a due diligence that shows, you're trying to do everything you can as an employer to reduce or minimize the risk that your employees would pose to others or other people's property. So, we hear a lot about negligent hiring from a pre-employment standpoint, and that's basically if you would hire somebody that you know or should have known was dangerous or unfit for a position, then, you could be sued for negligent hiring. Well, you're not going to hire anybody that you know is unfit. However, what really gets you as an employer is not that you knew that they were unfit, it's that you should have known they were unfit. And how would you know that? Well, it could be, was I doing background screening and a comprehensive background checks? It would have revealed a history of violence, and therefore I wouldn't have hired them. So how many of your employees have never been screened? It's a question, that organizations need to look at. Larger organizations probably have, folks in their workforce that have never had a background check. Probably the most concerning for existing employees is going to be negligent retention. And what that means is, if you as an employer become aware, or you should have become aware of a problem with an employee, and that employee had demonstrated unfitness, and you take no corrective action, which could be investigating, reassignment, or even termination, then you as an organization can be found liable under negligent retention doctrine. And so, kind of the should have become aware, again, is the phrase that can kind of get you. Had you been doing ongoing background checks, it would have revealed that, hey, this person, was arrested maybe for a violent crime after they were employed here. So due diligence, to be able to document due diligence, it needs to be background screening pre-employment and then on a continual basis every 3 to 5 years. So, here's a recent case study. One of our clients that had implemented a current employee background screening program. I mean, they're a reasonable size employer with 578 employees. They had a hit ratio of 42.1% on their existing employees. Now, average is about 10 to 12% nationwide. So, I mean, they're almost 4 times the national average. We found 250 felonies, 489 misdemeanors, and 29 employees, including a senior manager, was terminated for falsifying their application. So they compared all this data from the background screening reports against the original applications. And these 22 people had indicated they did not have a criminal record when they were hired and had been employed there, some of them for quite some time. So this might be a far end example as a case study, but it certainly illustrates a recent implementation of an ongoing screening program. So how do you implement an ongoing screening program? Well, first it requires a policy change or development if you don't have one to begin with. You've got to define your business necessity. It's going to be important in these days where the EEOC is requiring that you look at, what is the crime? How long ago was it committed? How does that crime impact the position? You need to define the frequency in your policy. How frequently are we going to do rechecks? Is it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 2 years? So define the frequency and define how it's going to be implemented. Are we going to take all of our 200, 300, 400, 500, 1,000, 200,000, whatever employees and background screen them over the next 2 months? Or are we going to do a percentage of employees on a monthly basis, maybe starting with those that have been here the longest, and do a certain number each month, and maybe you take a year or 2 years to work yourself through your entire workforce so that you've got them on an ongoing matrix. Indiana school districts expanded criminal history check. In Indiana, it actually, the employee pays for their background check, and the statute actually says that, that employee pays for the background check so long as you don't require them to pay for it more than once in a 5-year period. So that's where kind of 5 years is coming into play for a lot of school districts, because the state says you can have that employee pay for one every 5 years. And so at that, why would you not implement an ongoing screening program when it's not going to cost your organization a dime? We look at case law. This is a case, the ATM Corporation of America versus the Unemployment Board of Review. The employer had implemented a new policy requiring ongoing background checks. A single employee refused to sign the authorization. After 3 attempts to get this employee to sign the authorization, the employer terminated the employee, and the federal courts upheld the termination as the employer articulated a business necessity. And so even though you may have a policy change and you may get some kickback from some of your existing employees that say, hey, this wasn't policy when I started here, I think this is baloney, we don't need to be doing this. If you've articulated a business necessity why it's important that you're doing this, then the courts have basically shown in this case that they're going to upheld that termination. This is your policy. This is a requirement. Certainly an employee can argue, hey, this is a privacy issue, and I'm not going to give up my privacy issue. But the courts have been very clear that even though background screening is a privacy issue, and you cannot do a background check without an authorization, that you certainly have a right not to hire or to potentially terminate somebody if they refuse to allow you to do that, because it's placing your organization at risk. So we've got some technology to make the process easier. We've got the applicant tracking system paperless processing, by where we can create or program a link that can be used, and so your current employees would click on a link, sign an e-authorization, input their information, basically initiate the background check, and then we'll come back to you or HR or the HR team. We can even add a screening alert. If you say, hey, Mike, we want to do this every 3 years or 5 years, we take that matrix, that number, plug it into your account, and then what will happen is 30 days prior to a background screening, report expiring, you would get a PDF report with a list of employees that are about to expire, and you could check the ones you want to do a recheck on, because if somebody has, left employment, there's no reason for you to pay for a background check. So you simply select the ones that need to be rescreened, you email it back to us, it sends it, and we automatically upload it into the system, and it runs the rechecks. So, kind of went through that a little bit quickly. I'm going to pause here for just a second, open up the chat box and see if you have any questions. If you haven't signed up for our blog at info.safehiringsolutions.com, I would recommend that. If you want assistance or more information in implementing an ongoing screening program, simply give us a call. Be happy to, help you with that process. And then I think I mentioned earlier, if you want more information on e-reference check, we have a webinar coming up this week on June 27th at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I think there's a few seats left in that webinar as well that will give you an overview and a glimpse of what this automated reference checking platform looks like. Let me check this chat box real quick. All right, I am not seeing any questions, so hopefully that means I answered everything. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me, shoot me an email, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to listen in. Have a great day.